Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so you've sent over some really interesting material today. It's all based on Y Combinator's insights about doing things that don't scale.
That's right. It's a bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
Totally. Because we often think startups just, launch and either boom, they take off, and they just fizzle out.
Exactly. But these sources argue it's much more, well, hands-on than that,
Totally.
especially right at the start.
Yeah, like you've got this amazing plan, but you actually have to get in there and manually turn the crank to get the engine started.
It's precisely that initial push.
So our mission here is to really unpack these early, maybe unglamorous, but apparently crucial actions. Give everyone listening that core understanding without drowning them in theory.
Sounds good. It definitely challenges that myth of overnight success. YC's view is that founders have to make the startup succeed actively. It doesn't just happen.
Okay, so let's dive in. First big point seems to be about getting those very first users manually.
Yeah, this is probably the most common one. You can't just put up a website and wait for the crowds. You gotta go find them.
And the Stripe example they use is, well, pretty striking. Even solving a massive problem like payments, they didn't just sit back.
No, not at all. They were incredibly proactive. That whole Collison installation story,
Right.
where they'd literally install the software on people's laptops for them, that's intense.
It really is a world away from just sending a sign-up link. So
Yeah.
why? Why is that direct, almost like door-to-door approach so important?
Well, the source mentions a couple of reasons founders might avoid it. One is just being shy, or maybe lazy, it suggests, feeling awkward about direct outreach.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Rejection isn't fun.
And the other thing is the numbers look so small at first, right? Like getting 10 users.
Yeah.
It feels insignificant when you're dreaming of millions. Why bother?
But that's missing the power of compounding, isn't it?
Exactly. The source lays it out simply and start with, say, 100 users. Grow that by 10% a week. It doesn't take that long before those numbers start looking pretty impressive.
Hmm.
It's about planting those initial seeds. So those first users, even if they seem like a drop in the bucket, they're the foundation. Understanding that initial grind is key to seeing how the later rocket ship growth actually happens.
Got it. So acquire them manually, and then the next point is about making them really happy, right? Going above and beyond.
Yeah, delighting those early users,
Mhm.
taking extraordinary measures.
Like the Wufoo example, sending handwritten thank you notes. That feels almost quaint now.
It does. But think about the impact. It's memorable. It shows you genuinely care.
So why is this kind of intense focus so crucial, even if it's obviously not something you can do forever at scale?
Two things come up. First, many founders, especially technical ones, maybe aren't naturally focused on customer service. They're thinking about the code, the product.
Right, the engineering side.
And second, there's that scalability worry again. How can I possibly send handwritten notes to 10,000 users?
Yeah, you can't.
But the argument is, you don't need to worry about that yet. That early obsession with user happiness, it sets the tone. It can become part of the company's DNA.
Mm,
Trying too hard to please early users, probably not a mistake you'll regret.
that's a good point. And they contrast it with huge companies, right? Like Tim Cook isn't personally calling every iPhone buyer.
Exactly. But a tiny startup can offer that personal touch. That's actually a competitive advantage early on.
Okay, so this ties into the next idea. Focusing on an insanely great experience, not necessarily a perfect product right away.
Precisely. We hear Steve Jobs' insanely great phrase and think about polished products. But for an early startup, it's more about the entire interaction with the user.
So the product might even be a bit buggy, a bit basic.
It could be. But if you're super responsive, if you listen intently, if you fix things quickly, if you make them feel valued, you can still create incredibly happy, loyal users.
And that intense engagement is where the gold is in terms of feedback.
Absolutely. Overengaging is how you learn what really matters, what needs fixing, what features to build next. The source even warns against premature perfectionism.
Saying it can be a form of procrastination.
Yeah. Better to get something functional out there, even if it's rough, and start learning from real users. Their feedback, especially those very first users, is pure gold.
Okay. Another strategy they highlight is deliberately starting small, focusing on a really narrow market initially. The contained fire idea.
Right. Facebook starting only at Harvard is the classic example. Then specific colleges.
Why is that so effective, just limiting your scope like that?
It lets you reach a critical mass faster within that small group. If you try to boil the ocean right away, your first users are scattered, they don't know each other, there's no network effect.
Hmm.
But focus on one dorm, one company, one specific community. You can get enough people using it that it starts to feel alive. It feels like their thing.
Like Zuckerberg adding course lists to make it feel hyper-relevant to each school?
Exactly that, making it indispensable for that initial contained group. Marketplace startups often have to do this, finding buyers and sellers in one place. But it works for others too.
Find a niche where you can actually make a dent quickly.
Yeah. And sometimes it happens almost by accident, You build something for yourself and your friends, and they happen to be a concentrated group.
But it's better to be deliberate about finding that niche if it doesn't happen automatically.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Be conscious about where you can get that initial foothold.
Okay, moving on. The source also gets into specific unscalable tactics for different types of startups. Hardware, for instance, pulling a Meraki. What's that about?
Ah, yeah. Meraki apparently assembled their own networking hardware initially, instead of placing a huge factory order they couldn't afford or manage.
So building it themselves in the office.
Pretty much. It helps hardware startups get around those massive minimum order quantities. Plus, you learn so much. Well, you're intimately involved in the assembly. You find design flaws faster, you can tweak things easily. The source mentions Pebble, the smartwatch guys.
Oh, yeah, I remember them.
They apparently learned a ton about the importance of using the right screws by assembling the first watches themselves. Things you'd never learn from spec sheets.
Wow, okay. Valuable screws, got it. And for B2B, business-to-business startups.
The suggestion is to sometimes act almost like a consultant for one key early customer.
So, like, embed yourself with them.
Sort of. Really dive deep into their specific problems and build the solution just for them initially. The key is, you're not getting paid as a consultant. You're building your product through solving their problem intensely.
And the bet is that solving it deeply for one will make it relevant for others, too.
That's the idea. You use that first customer almost as a live specification. It guarantees you're building something someone actually desperately needs.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's the really extreme one for software. Basically being the software yourself manually at first.
Yeah, this one sounds crazy, but Stripe did it again, apparently. Behind the scenes, when users thought they were signing up automatically for merchant accounts.
It was actually the Stripe founders manually filling out the forms.
That's the story. It's the ultimate fake it till you make it, but with a purpose.
What's the benefit there? Seems incredibly inefficient.
It lets you launch way faster. You don't have to build all the complex automation up front. And crucially, you learn exactly what the process involves firsthand. What are the tricky parts? What needs to be automated?
So you gain invaluable knowledge about the workflow you're eventually going to build.
Exactly. You understand the problem inside out before you commit tons of engineering resources.
Okay, these are all things to do. What about things not to do? The source touches on common mistakes, like relying on a big launch.
Right, the fallacy of the big splash. Thinking you need a massive press event and instant widespread adoption from day one.
We've all seen products flame out after huge launches. Segway is maybe the classic cautionary tale.
That's a great example. Or even Google Wave, cool tech, big launch, but it just didn't catch on the way they hoped.
So why do founders fall for the big launch dream?
Maybe a bit of wishful thinking. Believing their idea is just so good, everyone will drop everything for it. And maybe wanting to avoid that hard, slow grind of acquiring users one by one.
Yeah, the manual recruitment we talked about earlier.
Exactly. But the reality is even great products take time to seep into people's lives. People are busy, they have habits. Adoption is usually gradual.
And partnerships. Trying to launch via a big partnership with an established company.
Also usually doesn't work for starting growth, according to the source. They can be useful later, sure, but they rarely provide that initial spark. Too much effort for too little initial gain, often.
Focus on direct action first.
That seems to be the message.
This leads to a really neat way of thinking about it, viewing the startup idea as having two parts. A vector, the source calls it.
Yeah, I like that framing. Component one is what you build the product through.
Component two is
the unscalable things you do initially to get it going, which usually boils down to that manual user recruitment and delivering that amazing early experience.
So it's not just the idea, it's the idea plus the plan for those unscalable first steps.
Right. And consciously thinking about that second part, planning for it, can make a huge difference, not just stumbling into it.
And